welcome to our conversation. And Melanie and I have just recently met, but we thought we might begin by introducing ourselves. Melanie, would you like to begin?
Sure, thank you. So I have a helper here today. This is one of our sacred colors. So in our culture, we have 4 sacred colors: red, white, black, and yellow. This is the color of language. It's also part of my name, which I will introduce. So I'll speak in Anishinaabe Ojibwe for a couple of moments here as I introduce myself. So Bojo and Dino Amaganaduk, that's greetings to my relatives. Washke Ogitadakwe Zanung, Indigenous cause, Waba Nangakwe Indigo Anishinaabe Mung. Those are my 2 spirit names. Mose and Dodem, I'm Moose Clan from my father's side. My mom is Loon Clan Mung. Bigtagong Anishinaabe Gajinakade Oshkinagan when GIN, the First Nation I'm from, is called Bigtagong Anishinaabe. I'm also from Kitagonzibi First Nation, Nindonchi. And I'm here in Bawating, so Bawating, Nindoya, Nungam, which is the place of the rapids along the St. Mary's River in between Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario and Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And Malani Indigenous cause Jaganashimung. So in English, I'm called Malani, named after my late father, Delaney Baugh. So we say Baugh when someone is in the spirit world. And so he passed many years ago, Delaney, and my mom, Melinda, who lives with me here in Bawating. So they halved it up, spelled it like Melanie, but it's pronounced Malani. And, recognizing where I am here in Bawating, it's just a few minutes from our home community of Garden River First Nation. And it's part of the Three Fires Confederacy of the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Anishinaabe. So Anishinaabe Kweyanda, I'm an Anishinaabe woman. And the English translations of Ojibwe are often also heard as Chippewa or Salto or Ojibwe in English. But we say Anishinaabe to refer to the human beings and to refer to ourselves. So that's part of the cultural protocols of how I introduce myself. And I'm delighted to be here in conversation with you today.
Well, it's a beautiful introduction. And I can't quite match all of it. I'll do my best. My name is Nina Simons, and I am the daughter of Rhea Cantor Simons Goodman and Barnett Simons. I grew up in New York City, home of the Lenape people, but I have lived for over 40 years now outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the traditional homelands of the Tewa, Tiwa, and Keres-speaking peoples, also known as the Pueblo peoples of northern New Mexico. I feel a really deep affinity with this land, more so than I ever did in New York City, and have been cultivating my own relationship to this place, to the grandfather peak named Shaggy Peak that is behind me, and the beautiful sense of deep history and a quality of sacred feminine that I perceive in this land that I find healing and nurturing and teaching for me. I also come to be here through a long relationship with the Temple of Understanding, who have graciously invited me into numerous conversations, which I have learned so much from. So I'm really happy to be here with you, Melanie, and to dive into rich topics together. I was hearing you talk earlier about the educational work that you're doing in a decolonial context, and it made me happy to hear that, because I find myself in my own learning, I have consistently felt a metaphor with decolonizing my mind and heart from a culture that I was raised in but don't share values with. And so it's been a very long process for me, which continues, of peeling away layers of the onion skin while I discover yet another embedded belief system that is not mine and that I just kind of accumulated over time. But I think reinventing and reimagining education feels so vital to raising up our leaders at this time. So I was thrilled to hear you doing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, miigwech. Miigwech means thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think, my education, when I think about being an educator now, I just finished within the last year my doctorate in social and ecological sustainability from the University of Waterloo. But going right back to being in kindergarten and all through my own education, there was, this hidden curriculum of of an anthropocentric bias, as how I would describe it, from the perspective of having my own mind colonized by that way of thinking, both through what was recognized as valid knowledge and what was invalidated, like knowledge that comes from land, that comes from a place of spirit. Bewajiganan, we say dreams and visions. Dreams and prophecies are a huge part of our decision making process. It's where knowledge comes from. So our ways of knowing, very embodied and holistic. It comes through ceremony, through practice. It's an oral culture, so there's a lot of storytelling. And I found through the formal education process that I was losing some of those frequencies. The elders like to call it the frequencies of listening to Mother Earth. And I was tapping into other frequencies like, data and empiricism and positivism. And so as I went through graduate school, I was recognizing myself. And when I say, colonized, this colonial way of thinking that is very anthropocentric, transactional, I would catch myself. But in particular, when I would speak with elders and language speakers who speak our languages fluently, because those languages, the structure of those languages come from a place of land and relationship with the local land and landscape, and how we say things is very different, and you can't really even translate back and forth, but we do the best we can with English. And so English as a dominant and dominating language really shapes the way that we think about things, about that relationship, and it disconnects us from those relationships. And so a dear colleague of mine, I was just having a conversation with him earlier this week, Teokas and Ghost Horse, who speaks Lakota. He talks about the nounification and nounifying and the thingification of the world. When something is a tree versus grandmother cedar or grandfather birch, we tend to thingify, nounify, and therefore disconnect from that being as a relative. So our whole language is a kinship-based language with very few nouns. There's a lot of verbs, not really the binary of male and female either. It's really about animate and inanimate. So you can speak for a long time and not say a noun, but we tend to, fear and objectify other beings, human and non, if they're a thing. That's what dehumanization is, which is really the underlying frameworks behind things like racism. And so I think the way we treat Mother Earth, our Earth Mother, the way we treat each other, we're socialized into that from a very young age. And I think the education system has such a powerful role to play in teaching young people right from the outset about complexity and the beauty of, understanding the world as a complex living system.
Well, and I imagine also revivifying your traditional cultural stories and ways of knowing. I'm reminded as I listen to you that I once heard Rebecca Adamson say that in her culture, there's no word for the love of a thing, because anyone who loves a thing, an inanimate object, is considered insane. Love is reserved for our relatives who are all around us. And the other thing that I was noticing as you spoke is that, I've had an experience last year. There was a very big forest fire that was the biggest in New Mexico's history, and it was not far from our home. We live on the edge of national forest land, and there was a time when I became really fearful for the safety of our home and the land around it. And I went to a friend who had studied a lot with an Indigenous teacher and asked her if there was anything she could teach me that would help us protect our homeland. And she said, yes. Identify a tree that you feel a strong connection with and create an altar around it and use flowers or shells or anything you want to create the altar, and then nourish that altar daily with water and sometimes with wine. And as you do, send your prayers into the roots of the tree and through the branches of the tree, and ask for its forgiveness, and tell it how much you care for it, and ask if it will be willing to protect you, and send those prayers down into its roots to the mycelium and the soil people and the rock people, and up through its branches to the star people and to the mountain that lives nearby. And I've done that ever since. And, what I found was that not only how grateful I was that our home didn't burn down, but it's really deepened my relationship to this place and the way that I feel held by it, and having a ritual that I could do in an embodied way that was really about deepening my connection to that relative and these relatives that surround us. It's so, so different than a Western way of being and knowing and relating.
I think having an embodied practice and an experience like that is so important, in thinking about education and, the work I do in transformative systems change. It tends to be very cognitive, intellectual. We have conversations, we write, we read, we try to think our way out of situations. And so you could have sat there and thought about, the forest fire and sent some good energy that way. But having an embodied practice, and I think that's why, connecting to the land and having people with opportunities to be in relationship with the land. We had a workshop, colleagues of mine and I, a couple of weeks ago in Stowe, Vermont. And so we were amongst the Abenaki traditional territory, but amongst the Green Mountains. And I offered a ceremony that connected them to letting go. So we call it a brushing off ceremony. And it takes medicines and brushes them off with an eagle fan. But it's part of a letting go ceremony. And I said, I know this isn't your culture. And so there's about 50 people there from around the world. And I said, it isn't an invitation that this becomes your ceremony per se, because you don't have the protocols to do that. But it's an invitation to participate in the ceremony, and the medicines themselves will determine what it is you're letting go of. So you may be conscious or unconscious of what you're letting go of. The medicines will know. And then I take that and I give that to the mountains and to Mother Earth to hold that, because she has the strength to hold, what they're letting go of. And I think that's what folks will remember. They'll remember the conversations and dialogue walks and theories and frameworks that were presented. But I've heard from people actually that say that they felt really changed after that ceremony. And that particular ceremony, from our perspective in Anishinaabe, is really to prepare you to go into a deeper ceremony. So we brush people off before they go into a sweat lodge or go do their fast. And I think, it helps us as physical beings, but we are spiritual beings on a physical journey. And to remember that spirituality, we need some help sometimes. We need helpers and practices and teachings that help us remember that kinship relationship. And just really quickly, I'll share, when I first was studying things like ecology, and I started to, always hear people talk about connecting to nature or wilderness. or the environment, or even the biosphere. I always thought, I don't ever remember elders talking like that. They never said those words in English. So I asked a language speaker in Anishinaabe, do we have a word for environment or nature or wilderness? And he said, his name's Albert Hunter from Rainy River First Nation. And he said, no, our word is Gidakimanan. And Gidakimanan means everything, everything in creation. The sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the waters, the animals, the plants, and your sacred place in creation, you as a being that's a part of creation. And so our word for nature, I guess, or the land translates to everything. And I think that's so beautiful. And that's, why I say English is a difficult language to try to capture the really dynamic and beautiful kinship relationship that we have as humans, all humans, who are all indigenous to Earth Mother.
Well, you do a pretty beautiful job at it, my friend Maleni. I want to bridge us to this moment and just recognize, I have been co-shepherding an organization called Bioneers, which really was started in 1990 in response to James Hansen sounding the alarm about climate change. And of course, our work encompasses many other things because we recognize that just as your word for nature is everything, it's all connected, right? We can't just address the political aspect or the educational aspect without addressing the other social aspects and all of it. So it's all interconnected. And we are in a moment of existential challenge, I would say, or polycrises, some people call it. And I'm reminded as I listen to you also that, we're in a moment of choosing between visioning forward and a culture that's based on fear and greed. And my sense has long been that part of the reason that our governance and our culture are so messed up is because we don't teach our children how to relate to their emotions. And so, I'm acutely aware of the choice that lies before us and how important it is with respect to the future of all life on Earth. And, I think I've become acutely aware of the incredible horror of what extractive industries have been doing both to Indigenous communities and to the land that they care for and live on and that they traditionally are related to. And so I find myself, as I've long been exploring leadership, I remember thinking when I was younger that I didn't want to engage in leadership that framed everything as a fight, because I didn't believe that that's how transformative change happens. But at this moment, I feel like as young elderhood is coming up on me, I am recognizing that there are things we have to take a stand for. And it certainly is the future of our children and the children of all of our relatives on Earth. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that's, it's really beautiful to, when we think about creating conditions for, the future, that we have agency in doing that. And that agency is expressed in our language. When I was writing my dissertation about something called transformative systems change, I asked elders, Eleanor Skeed and Bert Landon, who speak Anishinaabe fluently, I said, how would we define transformative systems change in our language? And they said, Egani mini go wiziwin. So mini go is that which is given to you, is you win from somebody else. So it's your sacred knowledge bundle. and it's a gift. And Nagani is like the future, or that's which is coming. And so they said Nagani Minigozawin are the gifts that we give to the future.
Mm.
And so your ancestors and all of the spirit beings, the universe, the mystery, whatever your culture, teaches you about these non-human helpers, they hear our distress. They know that the humans are in distress, and they hear our songs. They hear our crying. They hear our frustration with trying to make sense of it all. And so they taught me also about prophecy. And so the Nagani Minigoziwin is that we give these gifts to the future. And the other teaching is Wasa Inabada, which is we look in all directions. And so my, formally educated, colonized mind thought, and even though I grew up in my culture, I was still educated, in this way that socialized me to think about, the world in a certain way. And I've always had to fight that to come back. That's why I go to ceremony and I speak to elders and, carry a medicine bundle. And they said, Wasa and Nabada, this was Sandra Indian from Enigaming First Nation. She said, it isn't the four directions. So I thought it was the four cardinal directions, southeast, north, and west. She said, no, it actually means to look 7 generations before, 7 generations to come, and the current generation, and that you're holding those simultaneously. And so that generational thinking, and many people have heard of, from different nations, indigenous nations on Turtle Island, the 7 generations thinking. Wasa Inabada, that teaches us to think about the beings that are coming, but also what we're needing to remember. And then what we're currently doing. And so the prophecy of the 7 fires, and there's other prophecies, but just quickly, that prophecy foretold of a time when the 7th fire, we would come to this, we could say, polycrisis. We would come to this time where we had to make a decision as the humans on Earth about whether or not we would destroy Mother Earth and all the other beings along with us, or we would shift direction, that we would consciously choose different pathways and trajectories, and we would collectively shift in that direction. And I think that's what we do when we, make decisions about who we support, how we become leaders, and what we, I guess, role model for others in leadership. Are those types of decisions. So are we going to fulfill the prophecy that we would come together? And so the Haudenosaunee Mohawk people, and I have a spiritually adopted uncle, 2 actually that are Mohawk, and my uncle Dan Longboat, he talks and shared with me about the river of life, and we're all sharing the river of life together. And it behooves us now to work together, to protect that river.
Yeah. Well, and I think of much of what I've learned from Chief Warren Lyons, who is the faith keeper of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois 6 Nations. And 2 things that come up for me as I hear you, Maleni, are that many years ago, we had a conversation on the Bioneer stage about a green political future. And what Warren Lyons said at that time was, you've got to raise up your leaders, And so that really speaks to the necessity of reimagining education and really consciously creating opportunities in all of our lives for intergenerational collaboration and what I call mutual mentorship, so that we can learn from the youngers and they can learn from us as elders, and support each other. And of course, as I'm sure the Iroquois 6 Nations, as they are called in English, came together after a long period of embattlement, when the peacemaker taught them that it's in unity that we can survive and make peace and live in harmony. And I think we are facing political decisions, one of which is about unity and lifting each other up, and the other of which is about command and control and greed and fear and putting others down. And it feels like a very clear choice. And honestly, it's a choice. To me, it's a choice for what I hold most sacred, which is, as we've said, the future of all our relations. So let's see. I wonder, anything we want to add in our last minute?
Yeah, I think I would just, say that the teachings of the seventh fire prophecy, that the Ashkenazig are the new peoples, and that many of the elders speak to this, that we are living in the time of many of those old prophecies coming true. And it's a bit of cognitive dissonance, because you feel like, well, out of the millions of years and the thousands of generations and the hundreds of years that we have been together as different nations, that this is the time that some of those prophecies would come together and come to be true, and it is. And so there is really, an invitation there to live into the fulfillment of those prophecies, that we would find a way to come together and be in the river of life together in a really respectful way, and that place, that river, is a sacred place for us to be in good relations with each other.
Beautiful. And for me, I think one of my greatest teachers, of course, is the natural world herself, from whom I've learned that biodiversity is essential for our resilience and our adaptation. And so, don't we want to vote with our hearts and minds and hands for a future that is fully multicultural, multi-generational, that includes people of all ethnicities and faiths, people who come from all different kinds of backgrounds and classes, and that we have so much to learn from and with each other. And if we can foster a culture of pluralism that's based on reciprocity and respect, that's the way forward that will lead us in the right direction.
For sure. Well said. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for listening to me today, and thanks to all of you who are listening to us today.
Miigwech.
Thank you.